Can you use your listening skills in order to reduce your accent and improve your pronunciation? That's the question we're going to answer in today's live workshop. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. I'm Kim and I'm your guide to the essential conversation skills you need to sound more natural in English. Today we're talking about one of my favorite topics, which is working on reducing your accent and improving how you sound when speaking English. The thing I really want you to understand as we get into this workshop is that you need to really improve your sensitivity when you're listening to different things in order to reduce your accent. After all, if you can't hear why the way a native English speaker speaks in a certain way, then you won't be able to change that. You have to be sensitive to how it's different from your native language, how we use pitch and syllable length and volume and breathing differently than your native language. I hope today's workshop will really help you feel more confident, knowing that you're listening to the right things when you're doing all the work I know that you're doing while listening to English. So let's talk about why listening is essential for a natural accent. A lot of non-native speakers struggle when they're trying to reduce their accent because they can't actually hear the differences between their native language and English. This is a problem for me when I speak Spanish. It took me maybe 15 years of speaking Spanish in order to understand that I was using English tone in Spanish, and it just doesn't work the same way. But don't worry, I'll give you some tips so that you can tweak your listening, help your ear really hear the things that you need in order to sound more natural in English. Focused listening. So I want you to really take a moment and think about what I mean by focused listening. What I find that many non-native speakers do when they are learning English and they're trying to improve their English by using resources on the internet or resources like podcast videos and things like that, they're just listening passively. And what we mean by passive listening is that you're just surrounding yourself with the language in order to increase your exposure to the language, in order to kind of hear different voices, learn different things from different YouTube videos. Listening passively is something you should definitely do at the earlier stages of your English learning journey. But once you progress past intermediate, you move towards advanced, proficient, and even fluent in English, you need to be much more strategic about the listening that you're doing. This is what I call focused listening. You could also call it active listening, but that's a different technique that is used in conversation. So I'm going to call it focused listening. And this means when you are listening to something, you want to be tuning your ear, you want to be zoning in and focusing in on one particular aspect of the language. Now, with today's world, with all of the distractions that we have, even with the way that websites are set up to keep us clicking around, it's sometimes hard to do focused listening. So I'll give you some tips at the end of the video about what you should be listening to for this focused listening, but I really want to encourage you to gain this skill, to focus in on certain things when you're listening. It's okay to do some passive listening in order to relax, in order to watch a TV show. Maybe you just enjoy listening to the way someone speaks, but if you want to use your listening in order to reduce your accent, you are going to need to focus more. You're going to need to do focused listening. To work with one accent at a time. This is really key. Many non-native speakers want to listen to every single accent that's out there because maybe in your workplace you interact with a variety of British and Irish and Australian and New Zealand and Americans and Canadians, and you hear several different accents within the US or within British English. If you're trying to improve your accent and improve how you sound when speaking, when you're doing this focused listening, you want to work with one accent at a time. So I really want you to pay attention to this. You want to focus on one accent at a time. It is so easy with so many resources. There are a lot of great YouTubers who are British, and there's a lot of great YouTubers who are American. If your goal is an American accent, listen to an American accent. You're going to have to kind of tune out the others for a short period of time because you want your ear to become adjusted to the accent that you want to gain. And as we go through talking about different aspects of accent reduction, we're not going to break down the accent into tiny pieces. And that's because I already have a resource for you that can help you understand the accent. So if you need some review on what you need for a natural sounding accent in American English, I highly encourage you to check out this video on my channel, which is 4 elements of a natural sounding accent in American English. And I break it down into a little more understandable terms, so that you can understand what you're listening for. We're going to talk in specific details here about things you can really focus on in order to improve your accent through your listening. But if you want to understand the accent, I break it down in this video. All right, so let's get started, shall we? So we're going to start with my absolute favorite way to start off improving your listening skills so you can improve your accent, which is listening for pitch changes. Now, I really want you to understand why we're starting with pitch changes. Something I notice with working with clients, and I've been working with non-native English speakers for 10 years. Obviously, I've interacted with them for longer than that. Something I notice is that when somebody has a really strong accent, it's because they're taking the pitch from their native language and they're not varying the way they use pitch from their native language. Pitch is basically I won't call it the most essential thing of having a natural accent, but it's probably right there at the very top. So I want you to tune in to whatever listening resource you're listening to, and I want you to just focus on the pitch. At the beginning of tuning your listening skills to improve your accent, you are just being an observer. You're just approaching this with curiosity so that you can start thinking about how the pitch is changing in order to improve how the person sounds, in order to communicate certain things. So like I said, we're starting with pitch and pitch changes because you're developing your ear, you're developing sensitivity. I know some of you out there are singers or you are actors and you know a little more about how you can use your pitch in order to express certain ideas and express yourself more dramatically, more interestingly. But I really want you to tune your ear if you're not already paying attention to pitch. And by pitch, we mean the highness and the lowness of your voice. In fact, I already have a resource available for you. If you need a little more information on what we mean by pitch, it is called The Power of Pitch. And I talk about how pitch is important in stress and intonation in American English. So if you need some more information on pitch changes in English, please be sure to watch that video if you haven't already. It's one of the most popular on the YouTube channel because it gives you a nice solid introduction to pitch. In fact, there have been native English speakers who comment on the video saying that pitch is so important. Okay, so you're paying attention to pitch. You're paying attention to the rises and falls of people's voices, how their pitch goes up and how their pitch goes down. You're going to tune your ear to just paying attention to this. And I want you to ask yourself, how is this different from my native language? What is the person achieving by raising their pitch or lowering their pitch? How is this person different than this person, especially if you're watching a video where there's an interview or you're listening to a podcast? Paying attention to these differences is really going to help you tune your ear and start making improvements in order to improve your overall accent in English. Loudness and softness. Another way to refer to this is to be talking about volume. So what I want you to think about when we talk about loudness and softness of the voice is I want you to compare how English uses volume differently than your native language. If you've ever made a comment about a non-native speaker of your native language or even foreigners that you meet in your country or when traveling, a lot of times we observe that person is so loud. I have heard a million times Americans are so loud, or I've heard Americans call people from certain other countries really loud as well, because we use volume differently between different languages. Volume actually does communicate a lot of meaning, so you need to pay attention to the loudness and softness of people's voices. When does the voice get really loud? When does it get really soft? It may be situational, it may be different syllables that have loudness and softness, but you need to tune your ear for this in order to be able to improve your accent. If you can't hear the difference in volume, it's going to be very hard for you to have a natural sounding accent. If you need more help with this, I encourage you to check out my video on speaking up and using volume effectively. It's already available for you, and I talk a little more about what you can do in order to improve your volume and how you use volume in English. Syllable length. Okay, we're getting into it now. So today we're going to look a lot at syllables, stressed syllables, because this is absolutely essential to a natural sounding accent in English. So let's talk about syllable length in English. The thing I would say most non-native speakers struggle with is really being able to lengthen their syllables in order to hold them to the degree that a native speaker would, or even hold them a little bit longer because they're not a native speaker and they want to make sure the syllable is really long. But the reason many non-native speakers struggle to get their syllables as long and as held as they need to is that they don't hear the differences. So going back to what I said at the beginning about focused listening, you really want to make sure you listen to a particular listening resource and you're only listening for these lengthened syllables. You don't really have to understand the words. You just want to listen for the fact that the rhythm is going to be created by this syllable length. If you're really struggling to sound like a native speaker, I really want you to start with these three things. Listen to pitch, volume, and syllable length, but especially syllable length because that's going to help you with everything else we're going to talk about today. Syllable length is absolutely key to sounding more like a native speaker, and here's why. When we talk about the rhythm of English, we're talking about English as a stress-timed versus a syllable-timed language. So this is something that's really important to understand if you're not really sure why you don't sound like a native speaker or you're not really aware of the difference between your accent and a native-sounding accent. In English, we use the rhythm that is stress-timed, which means that the rhythm of English, the beats are even by the stressed syllable. Many other languages like Spanish and Arabic are actually syllable timed, which means that each syllable has more or less the same length. It will vary based on languages. I'm not going to analyze other languages right now. But if you're not paying attention to the difference between your stressed syllable and your regular syllable that's only a syllable, each syllable has its own beat, you're not going to be able to hear why your accent doesn't have the rhythm of English. This is something I notice all the time when I'm listening to fluent non-native speakers being interviewed on TV or wherever they're being interviewed. I often hear that they're not lengthening their syllables, and that's because you have to tune your ear in order to be able to distinguish these differences. So I want you to pay attention to the rhythm of English and understand the difference between stressed syllables and ones that are unstressed and how this lengthened syllable really affects how you sound when speaking English. So you're going to tune your ear to that. Pay attention to it when you listen to a native English speaker talking. Okay, next we're going to talk about stressed syllables and vowels. So now that you're a little more sensitive to the difference between a lengthened syllable, the syllable length, or a syllable that is just the same as every other syllable, let's talk about these stressed syllables and vowels. And I want you to notice that this is the first time I'm mentioning the sounds of English. Everything else I've been mentioning has to do with different aspects of your voice, which is actually really good news for you if you have trouble pronouncing certain sounds, is that you can actually gain a lot of improvement in how you sound when speaking English just by using these particular differences in the way that people use pitch, or they use a volume, or they use lengthened syllables, or they create the rhythm of English. Most of your accent, I would say 65 to 75% of your accent comes from those characteristics. But right now we're going to focus a little more on stressed syllables and vowels. Many non-native speakers get really frustrated and stressed out by thinking about certain sounds they can't pronounce, but you actually want to focus more attention on the vowels. So if you're trying to produce a natural sounding English accent, you want to pay attention to how you can use vowels in order to create different sounds. So that will help you distinguish between a long sound and a short sound. So you're going to listen just for the vowels on these stressed syllables. The reason I'm telling you to listen for the vowels on stressed syllables is that these are the vowels that are most clear throughout the word. These are the vowels that need to be accurate in order to help you speak more like a native speaker, in order to sound more like a native speaker in order to speak more clearly. You really want to pay attention to how native speakers are stressing their syllables and making the vowel sounds really clear. This will help you start to refine and improve how you produce vowel sounds in English. While I'm not going to go into a lot of depth on vowel sounds today, there are other resources on my channel that you can definitely check out in order to understand how you use your mouth to produce different vowel sounds. But I really want you to pay attention to how the native speaker is using their vowels. As you become more advanced, you're going to start noticing that there's pitch shifts within the vowels, and that's what's going to give you a natural sounding accent. But you have to increase your sensitivity to these vowels first, or it's going to be very hard to keep going. The video I want to recommend to you is to watch my video on number stress, how to pronounce numbers correctly in English. Pay attention to how the stressed syllable sounds different than the unstressed syllable. This is super going to help you sound more like a native English speaker. All right. So now let's talk about stress in phrases. This is one of my favorite topics, and I'm pretty much obsessed with it. So it can be really overwhelming as you're starting to understand sentence stress, which we'll talk about in a moment, in order to hear all of the different words that are stressed within a sentence when people are speaking. And so when you listen for stress in phrases, you're starting to break the language down into manageable chunks. This is a strategy that will really help you start to create a more natural sounding accent, because instead of listening for how you need to stress this entire long rambling sentence, much like the ones that you hear on this live video, but you may actually just want to listen to a couple of different phrases and listen to the way stress works in these phrases. By listening to which words are stressed and which words are not stressed, by stress we mean emphasized, then you're going to be able to hear the rhythm of English, which is going to enable you to produce the rhythm of English. So when you're listening to your resource, you're going to tune your ear to be able to hear which words are stressed and which words are not stressed in particular phrases. Let me give you an example so you know what you are looking for. So I have a video on my channel which talks about stress in phrases, and it talks about how to pronounce phrases with and. The reason this is such a great way to start is that we use all kinds of these things all of the time, the ins and outs, right? The ups and downs of life. So if you listen to stress in phrases with and, you're going to start noticing, oh, okay, I notice that there's stress in phrases with and you can start expanding that out because your awareness is going to be paying attention to the specific use of stress. So now let's talk a little bit about sentence stress. Once you've kind of built your confidence talking about or listening for sentence or stress in phrases, stressed syllables, paying attention to vowels, then you're going to go deeper and you're going to listen for sentence stress. And these are the words that are stressed throughout the sentence. I'm not going to get into detail about which words are stressed into a sentence. That's going to be overwhelming. I just want you to listen for it yourself. Remember, the goal of these exercises is for you to improve your own listening skills so that you're able to start noticing these things and then eventually producing them yourself. Like I said at the beginning of this workshop, if you're not able to listen for these things, if you're not able to identify what's going on, it's going to be hard for you to do it yourself. Many people jump to the end and they want to start doing it, but I'm encouraging you to tune your ear and pay attention in order to do it yourself. This is what people want to know when they're saying, oh, do I really need to work with somebody in order to improve these things? You may eventually need to work with someone, but a lot of the work, if you're really, really motivated, is doing the listening on your own. And that is especially true when we're talking about sentence stress. You're listening for the words that receive the most emphasis in the sentence. For example, if you just want a little background on this, I encourage you to check out my video on how to speak more clearly and how to stress short words. Although this video is specifically on short 1 and 2 syllable words, it helps you understand the difference between which words are stressed in a sentence and which aren't, and how that helps you sound more like a native speaker. Stress for emphasis. Now, this is definitely something that comes with more practice as you become a more advanced English speaker. So if this seems a little overwhelming, start at the beginning. You build up to this. This video is helping people at all different stages of the accent journey. So when we talk about stress for emphasis, we're talking about how we bring extra attention and extra force, extra sounds to a certain word in order to make a point, which I just did right there, not even intentionally. Native speakers will often stress certain words in order to make a point or change the meaning of the sentence. So you have to tune your ear to listen for which words the native speaker is emphasizing with their voice. I'm going to talk about this at the end of the video, but if you need some help understanding this, I encourage you to sign up for my free email course, Sound More Natural in Just 5 Days, at soundmorenatural.com, because I have a lot of resources already available and I'll help kind of walk you through that process of paying attention to these stressed words. If you're not noticing which words receive special emphasis and special attention, it's going to be really challenging for you to understand native speakers, because we provide so much meaning through our stress, through the words we're kind of drawing your attention with our voices to these particular words. So when you are listening for these words that receive this extra attention, it's going to really help you improve your accent. Not only that, it's going to help you understand native English speakers, which is also part of the reason you should improve your accent, is to understand native speakers. So pay attention to stress for emphasis. A good way to start with this, a really simple video that will help you understand this, is if you watch my video on I don't know, how to use I don't know in different ways, how to stress different words in this 3-word sentence, I don't know, in order to express different meanings. And you'll notice if you watch the video, you'll start understanding the different intonation patterns in order to express yourself more like a native speaker. But I think it's really important for you to pay attention in this video to using I don't know, how you can stress different words in order to express different ideas. Okay, so now let's talk about my favorite topic, which is your tone of voice. A lot of you have been commenting on different videos on the YouTube channel. It's not what you say, it's how you say it. Tone carries so much meaning in English. So you're going to need to listen to your tone of voice. So like I said at the beginning of this workshop, when we talk about pitch, it is the highness and the lowness of your voice. When we talk about tone of voice, it's how you're using these pitch changes in order to express certain thoughts. And you'll notice if you listen to native English speakers, they'll raise their voice high and then they'll drop, or they'll be very flat across because they're angry, or they'll be questioning and I'm not really sure what you mean. Listening to the person's tone of voice is going to give you a lot of information about their meaning. It's going to give you a lot of information about how they feel, their emotions, what they're trying to convey through their words, whether they're authoritative or whether they're doubtful and self-conscious. So you're going to need to tune your ear to different tones of voice that you hear in English. A great place to start is this video on my channel, which is about intonation in conversation. So it talks about how we use intonation in order to express conversational purposes. If you watched my other video on how to improve your listening in order to improve your conversation skills and improve your speaking, I talked about how we use intonation in conversation, because intonation is kind of the link between your accent and the meaning behind your words. It's what you actually are trying to do in conversation. So tuning in to intonation, to tone of voice, is going to help you improve your accent. You need to be sensitive to intonation. And I really encourage you, as with all of these other examples, to think about how you can focus in on these particular things at a time. Only listen to tone of voice. Listen to how people use a rise and fall throughout their sentence in order to communicate meaning. All right, so now we're getting into the more advanced aspects of accent reduction, which is breathing and pausing. This is something that I find many non-native speakers struggle with understanding and struggle with differentiating from their native language. As you'll notice in English, we tend to breathe in different places. We pause in the middle of the sentence. There may be a pause between ideas or a pause between thought groups, which we'll talk about in a moment. But in order to start doing this yourself and start chunking your own sentences, you're going to need to listen to how native speakers do that. It may feel a little uncomfortable at first, but you're going to need to listen to a particular listening resource and pay attention to where the person breathes. I often recommend speeches by former President Obama because he pauses a lot. You may want to listen to TED Talks because they speak more slowly and pause a lot. But when you listen to someone giving a speech, which we'll talk about at the end of the video, you're going to start noticing how the person uses these pauses in order to communicate their meaning, in order to give the person time to think, in order to emphasize a thought. And so breathing is sometimes why they pause, and breathing can also be in order to give a little micro pause mid-sentence in order to break ideas up, especially if they're talking on and on like you would do in a natural conversation. So I encourage you to really listen to how you can use breathing and pausing in order to sound more like a native speaker. So now let's continue talking about that a little bit more, which is talking about phrasing and thought groups. So this is something I've already alluded to in the previous example. We break certain phrases into short chunks, and this happens naturally. They're what we call thought groups. There's a lot of different expressions you can use to talk about it, but it's how we separate different ideas in order to make them more clear to our listeners. So you're going to need to listen for these chunks and really analyze what you're hearing in order to say, oh, where did they breathe? Oh, why is that a phrase? And that's going to help you deepen your sensitivity to the way we break up different ideas. And so you can start applying that when you're working on your accent. But if you can't hear these phrases, or you can't hear these thought groups, or you're not paying attention to it, it's going to be very hard for you to produce it yourself. When I meet non-native speakers who have almost entirely reduced their accent, they are doing this because they're very sensitive to it. They've listened carefully. They've really modeled what they've heard from other people in order to sound more like an American. So if that's what you want, you're going to have to pay attention to how people break things into phrases and thought groups. And then we're talking about everybody's favorite topic, which is linked words. This is when we talk about linking and connected speech. So this is something that is more advanced. I get a little bit frustrated sometimes when people skip to the end and they're thinking about connected speech and they're talking about words that are linked together. If you don't understand which words are stressed and which syllables are stressed and lengthened and louder and higher in pitch, it's going to be hard to hear which words are linked together. This is something that comes later on in your English speaking journey. And in fact, if you're doing it right, the connected speech will happen naturally. Someone mentioned that in the comments in one of my other live videos. If you're listening carefully to native speakers and you're producing words and you're stressing certain words, you're going to naturally link words together. This happens in many languages. For efficiency's sake, we link words together. So you may start noticing this. Maybe you want a little variety in your accent reduction journey. And so you may listen for the words that are linked together in order to pay attention to them and to be more sensitive to them. But at first, you really want to listen to which syllable is stressed because that will give you information about which syllable is linked together. So that's why it's at the end of this workshop. It's not the actual most essential thing that you need to learn first in order to sound more like an American, contrary to what many people will tell you. Okay, and now reduced words are the words where there are syllables that are dropped, or there are sounds that are dropped, or there are sounds that are linked together so they're abbreviated. A good example is the word chocolate. We often drop syllables in that word because we say it so often. Or February. We don't say February, we say February because we say it so often. Toronto instead of Toronto. We pronounce these things faster because they're words we use a lot. So you're going to listen for these reduced sounds, but you're also going to listen for reduced words. Words when we use contractions, for example, words that are reduced because they're not as important. We don't say cannot very often. We say can't because we're condensing the word. Isn't instead of is not because we say it frequently. So you're going to listen for that in order to improve how you sound when speaking English. But you don't really need to start there because that will start happening naturally if you start from the beginning and go in this order I suggested. Okay, and then we are also talking about speed of speech. You want to pay attention to how native speakers use different elements of speed in the way that they speak. Okay, it's not really so much about listening to whether or not the person's a fast speaker or a slow speaker in order to understand whether or not they're like they speak faster because they're from this part of the country, or they speak slower because they're from this part of the country. It's about trying to understand how we speed up for certain phrases or how we slow down for certain phrases, how we use these different elements in order to control the way our listener pays attention to certain words. Even though a lot of people comment that I speak quickly, you'll notice I'll slow down if I really want to emphasize certain words, or I want to make sure a point is really clear, or I'll speed up because I'm having a conversation. I'll slow down when I'm trying to really make a point. So paying attention to the speed of speech will help you understand how you can improve your accent as well by using the same elements. A lot of times I think non-native speakers speak too quickly because they're not really lengthening their syllables or drawing out certain words. So you can notice, why does a native speaker sound like they're speaking fast? They're probably not speaking fast. They're just using a different rhythm than you're used to hearing. So if you want more guidance with this, I really encourage you to check out my video on 7 ways to use your voice and breath to sound more professional. In this video, I go into a lot of depth about how you can use these different elements that I've talked about more quickly in this video. Okay, so we're going to move on and talk about what to listen to. So I suggest listening to podcasts because when you're listening to a podcast, you can choose one particular person to listen to or two people. So you get used to somebody's voice and you're able to hear their voice again and again and again. The same thing with interviews. You can listen to interview series. You can hear one voice that's familiar and another voice that's new to you each time that you listen. I also suggest listening to TED Talks. A lot of times in terms of improving your overall listening skills, TED Talks aren't the best because they're speaking under a little stress. They're speaking in front of a huge audience. So they may not be speaking super naturally, but it will help you understand pausing for effect, stressing words for effect, using tone of voice, breathing, because they'll be breathing more deliberately because they're giving a speech and they're trying to speak more slowly. Again, another one, speeches like commencement speeches. When people graduate from college, a lot of times famous people give speeches, and those are very interesting. Listen to how they use their voice for effect. Monologues. And by monologues, I mean things like watching Jimmy Fallon and watching his initial monologue at the beginning of his TV show where he makes a bunch of jokes, or something like Stephen Colbert. You can name your favorites in the comments, but there are a lot of different monologues you can listen to. It's when one person is speaking, so you can really focus in on this aspect of their speech. And another suggestion is to listen to vlogs. When you're listening to YouTubers who have lots of different vlogs and they're able to, talk into the camera, that can be really helpful because you get used to their voices. And these are more conversational. So they may give you different information from something like a TED Talk, a speech, or a monologue. So I highly suggest you listen to these type of resources. I want you to be selective. I want you to start with one or two at first. And by one or two, I mean one or two voices. If you're trying to reduce your accent, improve your pronunciation, you need to listen to one or two people at a time. You don't want to listen to every single person out there because it can be distracting. You may be picking up on a regional accent, or you may be listening to someone who has a certain way of speech that isn't natural. You don't really know. So I want you to be selective and choose people to focus on at the beginning of your accent reduction journey. Once you get more skilled at this and your ear is more attuned, you can switch between people. But if you're starting out using your listening skills to improve your pronunciation, just choose one or two people to start with at first. And I would love for you to comment with your favorites. Who do you like listening to in order to improve your accent? Please be sure to leave a comment and let me know. If you want my guidance on all of these topics, I encourage you to join my free email course and get my weekly emails. I already mentioned the link is at soundmorenatural.com, and basically you sign up, you get a 5-day email course, and then once a week you receive more resources that will help you improve your accent, because I will help tune you into what you need to be listening to. And now it is your turn. Please take a moment and let me know if you have any questions. And that's something I didn't mention specifically in this video because I feel like it's very personal, but it can be easier if you're trying to tune your ear to choose short videos, choose short podcasts, short interviews, choose things that are short that you can listen to a few times because that will really help you be able to make sure you've got everything about it. As you continue to advance in the accent reduction journey, you actually want to analyze and start taking notes on these different things. In fact, you should probably do that from the beginning, but in order to produce a native sounding accent, you're going to need to take notes, to analyze, to study why the native speakers are using these different elements. Thank you so much for attending this live workshop. If you have any questions, please leave a comment below the video. I'll be happy to get back to you. I hope you feel more confident using your listening skills in order to reduce your accent and improve your pronunciation in English. Once again, I'm Kim from EnglishWithKim.com. I'm your guide to the essential conversation skills you need to sound more natural in English. Have a good one. Goodbye.